For most of my life, I thought that rest had to be earned. I didn't realise that that's exactly why I was always feeling as if I was running on empty. So today I want to tell you how I stopped feeling guilty for doing nothing. You know that feeling when you sit down in the middle of the day, maybe with a nice cup of tea, and instead of relaxing, your brain starts going 10 to the dozen, thinking about all the things that you should be doing. Yeah, that used to be me. For years, I felt guilty for resting. It sounds ridiculous when you say it, but I wouldn't mind betting I'm not alone. Let me know in the comments if that's you too. I thought if I wasn't being productive, I was being lazy. But what I've learned is that the guilt was actually keeping me exhausted. So where did that guilt come from? I grew up believing that being busy was the same as being good. I never had much energy as a child and I loved to read. There was nothing I liked better than curling up on the sofa and reading a book from cover to cover and getting lost in the world. Because once in it, I was gone. My mum, however, was more practical. Even today at 80, I find it hard to keep up with her. She very rarely sits down. She was your typical 1960s, 1970s housewife. She was house proud. She was always cleaning, always cooking from scratch. Stop wasting time reading, she'd say to me. What are you doing? Do something useful. In fact, one of my earliest memories of my mum was when she first met my dad, and she looked at me looking at newspapers, trying to work out what those black squiggles were on the newspaper. I knew they meant something, but I was too young to read. And I remember she laughed and she said, I hope she won't be a blue stocking. Now, I had no idea what a blue stocking was, but it was obviously something undesirable if my beautiful soon-to-be mum's laugh was anything to go by. Well, I must have been a disappointment, I guess, because I grew up to be dreamy and bookish. It's who I am. Not at all practical. To me, my mum was the epitome of what a woman was. She was elegant, fragrant, modest, and busy. That was all I knew as a young child before I went out into the world and realised there were other ways of living. We didn't have the internet then, did we? We didn't have all the TV programmes which showed us other ways of life and other ways of being in the world. She wasn't unkind. She was just of her time. And she was trying to help me to become acceptable, I suppose, in the world as a woman. And she was a product of her own upbringing. So needless to say, I knew I could never hope to live up to her. I really tried to be a good housewife when I got married in my 20s, looking after the children, keeping the house clean, cooking them nutritious meals. I found it so difficult to stay on track. I always had this deep belief that I was inherently lazy, and so I fought it with all my might. If the house was tidy and the to-do list was ticked off and everyone else was looked after, then I'd earned the right to rest, the right to sit down. But of course, that right rarely came. There was always one more job, one more person to check in on, one more thing to do before I could legitimately stop. Even now, if I'm sitting down and reading a book and I hear my husband's car on the drive, my instinct is to jump up and start plumping cushions or something. He'd laugh if he could hear this, because he will tell you I've never been a brilliant housewife. I used to say, I'm married to you, not to the house. We live in different times now, and at least we can be ourselves more. Even when I did stop in my 20s, when I was still trying to be that good housewife, I couldn't enjoy it because I'd feel guilty. I'd feel as if I should be doing something useful instead of being lazy. So looking back now, I realise it wasn't all about time, it was also about worth. Because somehow along the line, many of us, especially women, learned that our value comes from how much we do for others. So even when no one was watching, that little voice in my head would whisper, Come on, Joe, don't just sit there. Stop being so lazy. Be productive. Be useful. The thing is with guilt, it doesn't motivate you, does it? It drains you. I remember one afternoon a few years ago now, and it was a beautiful day, and I promised myself an hour in the garden to read. The sun was shining and the book was waiting, and I found myself folding laundry instead. Why? Because somehow that felt more legitimate to me, a more legitimate use of my time. And halfway through, I caught myself and thought, hang on, what am I doing? For goodness sake, the world won't end if I sit still and read a book. My body and my mind were begging me to stop and to rest. But that's the thing about guilt. It just keeps you stuck in a cycle of depletion. You work until you're empty, and then you shame yourself for feeling tired and needing rest. So you never really refill the tank. It's a vicious cycle. The turning point for me was I was talking to an older friend, and she could see that I was absolutely worn out. I had 4 children under 7. I just had a baby. And she said, what are you doing? Why aren't you resting? You're supposed to be resting. Resting isn't selfish. It's being responsible. You can't look after all these people if your tank's empty. You can't look after yourself without any fuel in the tank. You have to rest. I mean, let's face it, you wouldn't let your phone run down to 1%, would you? And yet we do it to ourselves all the time. We don't expect our phone to perform if we've let the battery run down. We know it's going to just and go. But we do that to ourselves. I mean, why? Rest isn't something that you should do after the work. It's something that allows you to keep doing the work, whatever that work might be, inside or outside the home. If you're rested, you can show up with energy, you can be present, and you can show up with a twinkle in your eye and a spring in your step. And when I finally started to see it that way, everything changed. And I'm grateful that my body tells me when it's time to pause. I've learnt to listen to it. And when that old voice pipes up, you should be doing something, I gently remind myself, I'm resting. So these days, rest isn't a big production for me. It's not just about holidays or spa days, although, if you're offering, I'm there. It's about little moments of permission throughout the day, every day. I take micro rests, so 10 minutes between tasks where I do absolutely nothing. I put my phone down. I don't feel guilty. I just breathe and check in with myself. I take little contentment breaks where I go out into the garden and enjoy feeling the sun on my face. Or I'll put some music on maybe and I'll dance around the kitchen. Not because it's productive, but because it feels good. It's not exercise, even though it is. It's an exercise snack, isn't it? And I've set boundaries. I've learned to say no, or I'll do that later without apologising. And, that one takes practice, doesn't it? We're not really geared up to say no. I like to have my little evening rituals. Now, I'm not perfect, I'm human. I don't do this all the time. But my goal is to have a warm bath, to read a book, sometimes simply staring at the ceiling. It's valid. You have to remember that doing nothing is doing something. Every time I honour those pauses in my day, life feels softer and I feel more present, which I like. And funnily enough, when I do go back to work, I'm more focused, I'm more creative and more me. So here's my challenge to you this week, if you care to accept it. Notice if that guilt creeps in, the voice that says you should be doing something. And instead of pushing through, take a breath and tell it, I am doing something, I'm resting, and that matters. Because you're not a machine, you're a magnificent, complicated, creative human being, and you deserve to recharge without apology. Let me know in the comments, what kind of rest do you still feel guilty about? Or are you perfectly capable of resting without any kind of guilt at all? And I'd love to know how you achieve that. it take to reclaim that feeling of resting as doing? You might like this video next, which talks about doing nothing and why it's so good for us. Or this one, about the different types of rest that we all need. Because science shows us that we have to rest. Common sense shows us that we have to rest. So rest well, my friend. I'll see you next week.